Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you all are doing well. Today we're going to be looking at the cases of Brandon Swanson and Asha Degree. Both of them have been missing and there is basically no sign, and their cases have a lot of really interesting turns and some really interesting facts to them, so I thought we could look at them today. And while I was researching these cases, I found that around 600,000 people go missing every year. And while many of them, come back alive and are found, people and children alike, there are around 4,400 bodies every year discovered that are unidentified, and many of them continue to go unidentified despite our efforts in forensic scientists and like our DNA matching we can do nowadays. Many people still do go unidentified, and of course out of that 600,000, many people never come back home and they are found dead. So I found those numbers very startling. That is a lot of people to go missing every year. So I thought it would be, kind of an interesting thing to do on my channel, just help put the word out and talk about some of these interesting cases. So many of them have very odd twists and turns and they seem to really go nowhere, but there has to be somebody out there that knows where Brandon or Asha are. So I think that it's important to talk about these cases as much as murders and other stories like that. So if you like missing persons cases and you find them interesting, please let me know in the comments, or if there are any other cases you would like me to cover, please let me know. And otherwise, we will go ahead and start our story. Brandon Swanson was born January 30th, 1989, and on May 14th, 2008, he went missing. Brandon was originally from Marshall, Minnesota, and he was around 19 years old. Brandon was studying at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College in a campus in Canby, Minnesota. Brian left Candy at around 2 a.m. after hanging out at a friend's house. He was at a party. He actually attended 2 different parties and he did drink a little bit, some partygoers stated, but he didn't have an immense amount of alcohol. He wasn't tipsy or anything like that, but he did have a couple drinks that night. And he left those parties around 2 a.m. to make the 30-mile drive back to Marshall. Shortly after he left, Brian called his parents to let them know that he drove his car into a ditch. He was driving a Chevrolet Lumina, and he was not able to pull the car out of the ditch. And he was not able to drive his car out of the ditch. He tried backing out several times, but it was just making the car worse, getting it further into the ditch. Brandon's parents, Annette and Brian, jumped into their pickup truck and drove to get their son. Brandon told his parents he believed his car was near a small town called Lind. It was roughly 7 miles southwest of Marshall, and he told his father that he would stay in the car. When Annette and Brian drove to where they thought Brandon's car was, they didn't see him at all, and Brandon didn't see them either. And he was flashing his lights on and off and honking his horn, but nobody saw each other. So Brandon decided to get out of the car and walk towards a parking lot in Lind, and he told his father to do the same. At around 2:30 a.m., Brian had been on the phone with his parents for about 47 minutes, and they still were not able to find him. So the phone call was suddenly interrupted, and Brandon said, "Oh shit," and the phone was silent. His parents hung up the phone and attempted to call Brandon several times after this, but unfortunately after that last initial little bit of conversation, Brandon was never heard from again. After driving around and attempting to reach Brandon for several hours, at around 6:30 a.m., his parents reported him missing to the Lind police. The police were negligent during this time and told his parents that it wasn't that unusual for a young man to stay missing after a night out of partying. They thought that maybe he just went to a friend's house to sleep, or that he was sleeping maybe somewhere outside, maybe he passed out after he was drunk, and they refused to make a missing persons report during this time. The police even told Annette Swanson that it was Brandon's, quote, right to be missing, end quote. After several hours, Brian and Annette luckily got the police to finally search for Brandon. They first searched the town of Lind and found no trace of Brandon anywhere in the town, at no hotels, at none of his friends' house, anything like that. They were not able to find him. But they did search Brandon's cell phone records, and they found that Brandon had been calling from the vicinity of Taunton along State Highway 68. And Taunton is about 25 miles from Lind. While they were searching the area, deputies discovered Brandon's car was located in a ditch alongside the Lincoln County line a mile north of Highway 68. And Brandon struggled to get his car out of the ditch because of the way it landed into the ditch. It was kind of like hovering where like the wheel was like slightly above the ground, so he wasn't able to like get that traction to, you know, back up out of the ditch. If any of you live in an area where it's like snowing a lot or maybe a lot of rain, it's like, you know, sometimes it's really hard to back up out of ditches. It's hard to back up out of snow that way, especially if your car is not getting any traction. So Brandon was not hurt in this car accident, but he was not able to pull out, and he basically, again, like stepped out of the car when his parents didn't see him. They think maybe because he was drinking a little bit, he was kind of confused about exactly where he was. And because, you know, this was many years ago, it wasn't quite as easy to just like drop a pin on your phone and someone knows like literally exactly where you are. So it, you know, was more of a challenge for them to find him. But after he got out of that car, nobody has any idea what happened to Brandon, unfortunately. When Brian was questioned about his son's disappearance, he recalled that the night that Brandon went missing, he passed by fences with nearby water and boats. So at this point, the police believe that Brandon may have drowned in the state's Department of Natural Resources. So one theory is that Brandon may have drowned. Boats from the state's Department of Natural Resources were deployed along the river, and gates had been installed shortly before Brandon's disappearance. And unfortunately, the Lind police refused to do an extensive search for Brandon. It was just searched about 10 feet into the lake from where like the beach would have started. So if Brandon did somehow drown and, you know, got pulled farther in by the waves or anything like that, then his body would not have been found, unfortunately. And as of 2015, there has been a tip line set up for Brandon's disappearance, and there has been about 90 leads that have been interviewed by the police, but nothing has ever happened. Nothing has come up from this, and I really feel like something bad happened to Brandon, and I believe that a lot of people do as well, considering he said like, oh shit, you know, maybe somebody was coming at him and hurt him and then took his body and just disposed of it somewhere. I'm hoping that didn't happen, of course, but it does seem as if there was some sort of foul play involved. It doesn't just feel as if it was you know, he tripped and fell in the water or anything like that. And his parents did say while he was on the phone, he didn't seem drunk or confused. You know, if you've ever been out with friends or anything like that when you're drinking, you could tell when somebody's, you know, drunk or even tipsy because they're acting a little goofy or whatever. So I definitely feel like he wasn't drunk enough to fall in the water and get hurt. And if he did fall in the water, I do feel like it was probably on accident. You know, maybe he tripped and fell on like a large rock or something and hit his head. But I don't feel like it was because he was drunk. I feel like the police were too focused on the fact that he was drinking, and they tried to make it seem like he was just drunk and just fell somewhere and drowned. But I really feel like there was some foul play involved. I feel like maybe Brandon was hurt by somebody, and that's why there's no trace of it, because I feel like we would have found something, his phone, something laying around. And unfortunately, it just seems really sad because, you know, it just seems like he disappeared without a trace. And, you know, I just feel really bad for his family. But one positive thing did come from this. Brandon's mother and father, Annette and Brian, were able to pass a law called Brandon's Law, which basically states that somebody has to be reported missing. If you call and report somebody, the police are not supposed to tell you, well, they could be missing, they're only like 19, you know, you can't say that anymore. And unfortunately, that still happens a lot. You hear, you know, cases where people say, you know, they're allowed to be missing, they can do whatever they want, they're 22 years old or whatever the situation may be. But his parents did help enact that law. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone in your family is missing, even if it's someone that's older, that's not a minor, make sure you let them know that it's against the law to not put out some sort of report for this person, because because everybody deserves to be looked for. And since Brandon's disappearance, his parents keep their front porch light on every single night to let the world know, let their community know that they are still waiting for Brian, that they still have hope that he is going to come back home. So of course I will leave the tip line for Brandon down below. If anybody knows any information, please contact this tip line. It is so important to find Brandon, and hopefully he is found safe, or at least his parents can have closure knowing what happened to him. And for our next case, we're going to be looking at Asha Degree. Asha was 9 years old when she went missing on February 14th in 2000. Asha was from Shelby, North Carolina. And Asha was just a normal young girl. She went to school, she enjoyed her friends, she, loved her family. Her and her brother O'Brien got along very well, and they just had a very nice, happy family type situation. So this was very shocking to the family when something happened to Asha when she went missing. Harold and Laquila made sure that Asha and O'Brien had positive influences. They only watched nice movies. They weren't allowed to watch just anything on TV. They had a very, positive home life. They got along very well. And so again, it was just so shocking when this happened. And Asha's parents, Harold and Laquila, made sure that their children were insulated from outside influences. Their life was centered around family and church, and they all very much loved each other, and they all loved Asha very much. Laquila went as far to even deny having a computer in their home because she was afraid that one of her children would get lured out of her home from a child abductor, because obviously you see this a lot on TV and you see this a lot on crime shows that, abductors can pull children and lure them out of their home from the internet. So she didn't even want a computer in her home. She didn't even want her children to be exposed to that type of thing. So the family was very close. They told each other everything. They talked about everything. They were very open with each other. The night before, on February 13th, which would have been a Sunday, Asha and O'Brien went to church with a relative and then returned home at around 8 p.m. The children went to bed shortly after in the bedroom they shared, and about an hour later, the power went out in the neighborhood after there was a car accident close by. The power came back on at around 12:30 a.m., and Harold checked on both of the children and saw Asha and O'Brien sleeping in their beds. At around 2:30 a.m., right before he went to bed, on February 14th, he saw them again. At some point between 2:30 a.m. and 4:15 a.m., O'Brien heard Asha's bed squeak, and he heard her kind of rustling around, but he just assumed she was turning around and really didn't think much of it. And between this time, Asha got out of bed, she took her backpack that already was packed, and she had several sets of clothes and personal items with her and left her home. At around 4:15 a.m., a truck driver and another car saw Asha walking along Highway 18. She was wearing a long-sleeve white t-shirt and white pants, and she was walking just north of the junction, Highway 180. Neither drivers stopped to help Asha or even reported it to the police, but they did call after they saw a TV report about her disappearance. Although later a driver did report that they saw Asha walking down the street, but they turned around and offered to help her, and she darted off. Laquila woke up at about 5:45 a.m. to get her kids ready for school, and February 14th was a big day for the family. Not only was it Valentine's Day, but it was also her and her husband Harold's wedding anniversary. So that day was going to be special. She was in great spirits, and right when she walked into her room and only saw O'Brien, she immediately panicked. Laquila searched her entire house, yard, and cars, and then she walked across the street to her mother's house and checked her home as well, and Asha was nowhere to be found, so she immediately called the police. At 6:30 a.m., the first police officers arrived at the scene, and police dogs searched the scene to pick up Asha's scent. A search started immediately through the neighborhood, and everyone in the neighborhood was searching for Asha by 7 a.m. The next day, on February 15th, candy wrappers and a Mickey Mouse-shaped hair bow that was identified as belonging to Asha were found at a shed at a nearby business along the highway. There was also a photograph of a young African-American girl who was about Asia's age, who has never been identified, found with the candy wrappers and hair bow. On February 16th, Laquila realized that Asia's room had been missing all of her favorite clothing. And about a week later, the search unfortunately was called off. 9,000 man-hours had been invested in a search of about 2 to 3 mile radius of where she had been last seen. Flyers were posted all over the area, and about 300 leads had been submitted, from possible sightings to tips about abandoned homes and wells where Asia might have ended up. And on August 3rd, 2001, Asia's book bag and other items were discovered during a construction project off Highway 18 in Burke County, which is located about 26 miles north of Shelby. Her backpack was wrapped in a plastic bag and contained a copy of Dr. Seuss's Mick Elliott's Pool and a t-shirt of the band New Kids on the Block. And unfortunately, this is where the case has gone cold. There are age-progressed pictures of Asia, which I will post, and I just found this very sad, and it feels like they did not search very hard for her. I know initially there was a pretty big search, and her family continues to hold rallies and still have hopes that Asia, will come home, but it does seem as if she wasn't looked very hard for, and I find that so sad and unfortunate, and that does happen very frequently, especially in the African American community. It does seem as if when a child goes missing from that community, they are not looked that hard for, and people in general of color. And so I just found that really sad that she was, not really even looked for that hard. It was going on for a week. And there has been other murders, like the Delphi murders. Of course, we don't know if Asia was murdered, but that's just used as an example. But the Delphi murders, that's still going on, hot and heavy. They're still actively looking for that. They are still, making a big deal about that. There's been a lot of money invested into that case. And I just find it really sad that for certain children, really big searches go on for years, and for other children, it's not the same. And investigators still believe, which to me is absolutely ridiculous, that Asia left home on purpose. And that narrative comes from the fact that Asia played basketball for her school, and a couple days before she went missing, her and her team lost a game, and I guess she was really upset, and the whole team was really upset, and it was just not a good time. And of course, when you're really young, stuff like that is a huge deal, right? And so they feel that because of her disappointment, that she really disappointed her parents and decided to leave home. And that could have been the initial thing, right? Maybe she was I'm just a failure and I'm sad, of course, it's, when kids are young, everything's a huge deal. So I definitely think that could have been the initial thing. I don't know about leaving in the middle of the night with all of her things. I'm not sure, because she did have pictures and everything on her. But I feel when she was out there, somebody saw her and, unfortunately probably scooped her up. And that does happen. And unfortunately, a lot of children are sold into sex trafficking, or unfortunately are victims of homicide. And so I'm hoping that someday Asia can come home, because this is really sad. And, I do feel maybe she ran away. I think everybody did that when they were young. I remember I threw a bunch of t-shirts in a backpack and Goosebumps books and stuff like that, and I just walked off, and I made it a block, and my mom was like, you need to come home. So I definitely feel that does happen, and I think that sometimes kids intentionally walk away and then something bad happens and they didn't mean to get, wrapped up in that. So I definitely feel that's maybe what happened to Asia, but I definitely feel they should have searched more extensively for her, especially since she lived so close to a highway, and it seems as if there's a lot of forest area around there. They should have looked for her even more than what they did. And so I do feel it's important to raise awareness about these topics, because unfortunately many children of color and people of color go missing every year, and they are not looked into at all, and that's very unfortunate. So let me know if there's any other cases that you guys want me to cover, especially involving people of color and children of color, so we can kind of raise awareness about these cases and help them either receive closure or hopefully found. So let me know what you all think about these cases. Again, any tip lines I will leave in the description. I will leave any information I have down there where you could contact directly if you ever have any information, if you happen to see Asha and maybe you've never heard of this case. Again, I'm posting age progression photos if I can find any more than what I've already posted. So definitely, keep this in mind. And also, again, let me know what other cases you would like me to cover, because I think it's so important that these people come home and that we, again, search more for them and we watch out for things. I think that the people, especially that drove by Asha, should be ashamed of themselves for not reaching out and not saying, hey, there's like a little girl walking at 4 a.m. by herself. Why would you not call the police for that? I don't understand. I know sometimes it seems scary to involve yourself in things, but if you see somebody that's, having a problem, you don't have to go up and approach them. Just call and say, hey, this happened. Just wanted to let the police know. So I feel like, in any case, I feel like somebody has to know where Asha and Brandon are. Somebody has to know what happened to them, whether it's someone's brother or sister that did something bad to either one of them and they want to report it. I definitely feel like it's important to talk about these subjects because it does happen, where people report that their brother was a serial killer or their husband was a serial killer, things like that. So it's so important to talk about these things, and as uncomfortable it could be to talk about children going missing, it's a big deal. It's something that we need to raise awareness about. So otherwise, I'll stop rambling. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, please let me know what you would like me to cover down below. I always like to hear your guys' suggestions, and I hope you guys stay safe out there and have a great day. Bye-bye.